Alta California, 1846 to 1848, the final chapter of Mexican California. What was happening in the rest of the U.S. in 1846? This is very important for the history of California at this time. The 11th President of the United States was James K. Polk. He was president between 1845 and 1849. The population of the United States continued to grow due to immigration and continued to move west to Oregon, Alta California, and Texas in search for land to farm. Railroads in the eastern part of the United States made it easier for travel. The telegraph allows for easy communication across the growing United States. With growing settlers from the U.S. moving to Oregon, the U.S. acquired the Oregon Territory in a treaty with Britain in 1845. Texas had declared itself independent from Mexico in 1836 and asked to finally become a part of the United States. It finally happened in 1845. Here is a map of the United States in 1845 and 1846. On the right, in the eastern part, you can see the number of new states that had been added to the United States after the Revolution or since the Revolution. The territory that had been acquired in the Louisiana Purchase began to take shape as territories, which would later become states. The Republic of Texas declared itself independent from Mexico in 1836, and Texas had had a big migration of settlers from the United States who had gone to Texas for free land and territory for farming and had hoped to become a part of the United States soon after their Declaration of Independence in 1836. But this did not take place for another 9 years. In the Northwest, the territory known as the Oregon Territory was disputed by England and the United States. But with the growing number of settlers coming in from the United States and with limited settlers coming from England, it was clear that the United States had a growing presence there. And in 1846, in the Oregon Treaty, it was negotiated that at the 49th parallel north, anything south of that would belong to the United States, and anything north of that would belong to England. Texas matters to California history. Texas did not become a part of the U.S. for almost 10 years for two major reasons. The U.S. did not want to risk going to war with Mexico in 1836. In 1836, Mexico had just been a new nation for just over 10 years. At the same time, the United States had acquired the Louisiana Purchase, had began to explore and extend west to this vast new territory, and was making a lot of gains in the number of people coming to the United States, and there was growing movement to the west to accommodate for the explosion in immigration to the United States. In addition, the United States was divided about slavery. After the Louisiana Purchase, there was a debate in Congress about whether if the new territory was divided up into states, whether they would become slave states or free states. The North and South was divided about this issue. Texas, or the Republic of Texas, had wanted to maintain slavery in its territory, and the Northern congressmen were against this. Here is a map of the United States in 1846, and you can see the slave states in the South in this pink salmon color, and the free states in this turquoise area. There had been a compromise, the Missouri Compromise, where senators and congressmen had decided that any new territory that became a state south of the 36th parallel could become slave states, but any territory north of that would be free states. Texas was a very big territory, and there was growing concern that the southern states with slavery would have more power in Congress. You can see by this map that at this time, slave states outnumbered free states in the north. When Texas is finally annexed in 1845, this causes conflict between Mexico and the U.S. President Polk sends troops to the disputed border area on the Rio Grande and Nueces rivers. He also sends John Seidel to Mexico to resolve the boundary issues and to offer to buy California and New Mexico. The Mexican president says that California is not for sale. Mexico refuses to sell, and President Polk sends General Zachary Taylor to the Rio Grande River, which Mexico saw as an act of aggression. Mexico also sends troops to Fort Texas. By the time the U.S. declares war on Mexico on May 13, 1846, two battles had been fought in the Texas territory. The U.S. Congress declares war on Mexico in 1846, and by the time the U.S. declares war on Mexico, the United States had more people who could enlist to fight the war than Mexico did. The growing immigration population in the United States allowed for this nation to enlist thousands of men who were willing to fight for the United States, for their new country. Meanwhile, in Mexico, there had not been such a big boom in immigration, and the majority of the Mexican government was in the southern part of the country. Mexico was still in the middle of determining what direction the new country would take. It had gone from establishing a monarchy to establishing a republic. The U.S. military grew from 8,000 men to 60,000 paid men quickly. In addition, access to the various territories was easier for the United States. President Polk also believed in manifest destiny, which is the idea that God wanted the new Americans to expand west, to establish a new nation from ocean to ocean. The idea was to transform the Western territory to make it American, including taking the land from the people who were there already, the indigenous people and the Mexicans. The U.S. troops in Mexico took 4 fronts. In 1846, the U.S. troops battled in Texas and in northern Mexico, and you can see that here, at Corpus Christi and Monterrey. In 1846, in California, or Alta California, settlers from the United States had begun to grow restless with the idea that they too wanted to become a part of the United States. There was a group of men who called themselves the Osos, began to organize after John C. Fremont arrived to the territory. Fremont came from the eastern part of the United States and arrived to Sutter's Fort, where he met with the Osos and began the campaigns in Alta California. At the same time, Kearny came west on this southern route and arrived through New Mexico. Meanwhile, the United States also sent troops to Mexico City by ship, and they entered Mexico City at Tampico and at Veracruz. At the same time, U.S. Commodore John Sloat, who was in Mexico, in Mazatlan, took his ship north in 1846 to take Alta California before Britain could take Alta California. The Bear Flag Revolt in Alta California was a movement that lasted for 1 month between June and July of 1846. At the same time that the U.S. had declared a war on Mexico, Major John C. Fremont arrived to California, to Sutter's Fort, with a small militia, and he began to encourage a group of settlers who called themselves Osos, the Bears, to take arms against Mexico. By this time, the Mexican government began to distrust the new settlers, whom they believed wanted to become a part of the U.S. In June 1846, the Osos, led by William Ide and Ezekiel Merritt, took the unguarded Sonoma Presidio. They also took retired Mexican General Mariano Vallejo hostage. Vallejo was confused because he wanted California to be annexed by the U.S. too. Ide and Merritt declared California an independent republic. They made a flag from a cotton sheet and red paint. They painted a grizzly bear and a star, inspired by the Texas Republic flag. And the bear was to represent the group who called themselves the Osos. Fremont took command of the Bear Flaggers and took unguarded San Francisco Presidio on July 1st. Meanwhile, U.S. Commodore John Sloat was racing north from Mexico to take Alta California before the British could take it. And he took Monterey in Alta California without a fight and raised the U.S. flag on July 7, 1846. After the U.S. troops took Mexico City on September 14, 1847, peace negotiations began. By this time, the U.S. had several battles in and around Mexico City, and the Mexican military had been defeated. The war finally ended on February 2nd, 1848, with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This treaty made the Texas border with Mexico at the Rio Grande River, and California and New Mexico were acquired for $15 million. The impact of the Mexican-American War in the United States would be felt for many years to come. The new acquired lands would be the beginning of an era of conflict over slavery in the United States. New territories that became states would either allow slavery to be legal or not. This issue would be settled in the Civil War of 1865. Before then, gold was discovered in California in 1848.